All right, so we'll get started. So attendees to the webinar, thank you for being here today. Make sure if you have a question, you can put that in the Q&A box or use the chat. We'll be monitoring both of those and just bouncing in. I'm going to turn the floor over to Deb in just a second. So Deb is with us today, author of the best-selling book, Branding is Sex, Get Your Customers Laid and Sell the Hell Out of Anything. So that should be a very interesting next 45 minutes or so. She's also the CEO of Soul Marketing and Brand Strategy Consultancy based in Austin, Texas. Today she's going to talk about brand strategy exercises that any business leader can do to instantly drive alignment and focus within your team and between your brand and your customers. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Deb, and I'm just going to monitor Q&A, and I may raise my hand and ask a few questions myself. So take it away.
Right on. Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll have everybody sort of follow along with me. I have a tendency to move pretty fast here. Everyone should be looking at my screen. So I like to talk about my job being a position where I work with companies to create these conditions of irrational loyalty. And this idea of irrational loyalty, I usually ask audiences, I'm like, what are you irrationally loyal to? And I think of a lot of brands that people are irrationally loyal to. One that comes to the top of my head is the Apple iPhone, for instance. You know, talk about the very, very definition of irrational loyalty. We know that there is other stuff out there, other smartphones out on the market that cost less, they're easier to get. You certainly don't have to wait in a long line to get them, and they don't do new releases, on a very infrequent basis. They are more durable, they have better glass, they have higher performance, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about Android phones. Yet we are so irrationally loyal to our iPhones that we would feel like somebody took something really, really important away from us were we to use something else. And so a really, sort of poignant story about this is the time that I went to the store when the Google Pixel phone came out. I thought, hey, that looks really great. That has a better camera than is on the iPhone. It certainly looks more durable. It looks like it has a lot of the features and functionality I want. I went to the store. I actually held it in my hand. It was beautiful, lickable technology. Yet I personally felt dirty for holding it in my hand. I felt like I was cheating on Apple, which is a bizarre feeling when you think about it. And so this condition of irrational loyalty is available for any brand, whether you directly serve consumers or you serve other businesses. And I want to tell you another quick story about a brand that killed its customers that inspires something that we call irrational loyalty. So I'm from Texas, and one of our favorite brands here is Bluebell ice cream. And I'm sure people who are Texas natives or naturalized Texans or folks who are from the Southeast and Southwest are becoming increasingly familiar with this brand. But quick story about Bluebell. Back in 2015, they had a listeria breakout in their plant. And when that occurred, 11 people got deathly ill and 3 people actually died. Yet the Bluebell brand is so ingrained into our way of life here in Texas. It's something we have memories that involve Bluebell ice cream. There's a great nostalgia for it. There's like an obsession with Bluebell ice cream. So much so that when Bluebell was off the market for 3 years and they spent time retooling their plant, getting everything back up to speed, when they came back on the market 3 years later, after killing 3 of their customers, people were waiting in line out the door, down the street, around the corner to get into the local grocery store to get themselves half a gallon of Bluebell ice cream. And it wasn't even one of their fancy flavors. It was actually vanilla. And so that's what we mean by irrational loyalty, a bond so strong that even if the very, very worst thing that could potentially happen to a brand were to happen, folks would feel like they were still bonded with that brand. And like I said, that's available for anybody, regardless of the size of your company or who you serve. So what is a brand? I consider a brand to be the collective emotional response to your product or service. So I went to business school 25, 30 years ago. I've been doing this kind of work my entire adult life. When I went to business school, they taught us that branding really was just sort of next level of the 4 Ps of marketing, which are product placement, pricing, promotion. And really the world of branding has emerged. We have so many choices today for the things that we buy and for the media that we consume. We become aware of so many different products. My office, I sit in front of a big picture window and I literally see thousands of cars going down the street in front of me. I am probably aware of, between the different car manufacturers and makes and models and different model years, I'm probably aware of, off the top of my head, I could rattle off 27 different models of cars. And so just because you're aware of something doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to buy it. You have to have an emotional response to it. And the field of branding really is about creating the feels for something. And people have to feel something in order to buy something. And so that's why we look today at branding as this emotional activity, which seems really counterintuitive to a lot of us who are very quantitatively driven. So I also talk about branding being expectations, it's memories, and ultimately it's a relationship. So there's no other field of marketing or business where we get to use words like love and hate and bonds and things like that. Truly, we have a relationship. Like, I have a relationship with this iPhone. I have a relationship with all things Apple. I love all the thingies. We are in a deep intertwined relationship. I am deeply intertwined with Bluebell. I have a relationship with them. I have a relationship with everything that I eat, that I drink, that I buy, that I wear. Also, the software that I buy and run my business on, the people that I hire for services in my business, it's all a relationship. And so I want everyone to think of branding as a relationship. Ultimately, branding is differentiation that's meaningful. So I am the proud owner of probably 150 different types of kitchen things, kitchen gadgets, most of which sit in a cabinet completely unused because I was drawn to the idea of something, not necessarily to the promise of a better life through using these kitchen gadgets. But at the end of the day, you know, all of the different slicers and dicers and spinners and graters and things like that, my favorite thing in the kitchen is still a really, really good kitchen knife, which speaks to this idea of meaningful differentiation. If you think that branding isn't about meaningful differentiation, then I challenge you to go stand in the shampoo aisle at your local big box retailer or your local grocery store. You will literally be paralyzed with just the amount of choice that's available. It's really, really hard to select. And often people don't buy things because of the promise of a different functional benefit. Remember, I talked about the iPhone and I talked about an Android device. They have the same functional benefits, meaning they get you on the internet, they can do photography, they carry your music, it's a media consumption device. And oh, by the way, you can make cell phone calls. Differentiation that's meaningful, sometimes it's really hard to get to what that meaningful differentiation is. And so just as a side note, if anybody wants to read something or look at something that is sort of supplementary to this, that really supports this, I encourage you to go and look at the Jobs to Be Done methodology and framework from Dr. Clayton Christensen, where he talks about everything that we buy. It's like we hire something to do a particular job for us. And so branding is really about what is the particular job that we're hiring a product or service or a company to do for us. Ultimately, a brand is a promise. We talk a lot in the scaling up methodology about the brand promise. That's kind of core to the methodology that we're using to scale our businesses here. And that's true. That does extend to, you know, all of your customers and everything you do. Ultimately, it's the benefit that you provide to the people that you serve. And so here's a couple of my favorite brand promises. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I love the Ritz-Carlton brand promise. I think it is the most perfectly constructed brand promise of all time. And it's ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And every experience that you have with the Ritz-Carlton, whether you're staying at one of their standalone hotels or a fabulous resort, feels like ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Amazon, for instance, their brand promise is everything from A to Z. Amazon is a platform to get everything from A to Z. You can see how they cleverly even baked the brand promise right there into their logo, where there's a little arrow connecting the A to the Z. And then Google, their brand promise is all the world's information in one click. And I encourage everybody to really, really think about this brand promise, make it inclusive of customers, and use it as an anchoring doctrine and guidelines that help you choose what you're going to do, and more importantly, what you're not going to do as a business. And I know, for Petra members, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but a brand promise is ultimately like really powerful for the business. Finally, a brand is a story, and it's your story. And why do you need a story? Well, that's because 98% of what your brain is doing right now happens outside of what you are aware of. What I mean by this right now is that in order for me to deliver this information in this webinar, I only have 2% of your brains available to me right now, because the other 98% of what your brain is doing is stuff like digesting your lunch, or helping you sit up straight, or cell regeneration, or helping you circulate your blood. So I only have 2% to work with, and then 95% of buying decisions happen outside of the brain, where cognitive brain processing, language processing, mathematics, cognitive thinking is occurring. And so we need a story, and a brand is like the shortcut for the story of your organization. And I like to tell people, think of your brand as a magnet, and that magnet is designed to attract to it people who share the values and beliefs of the organization behind the brand, and the values and beliefs of the brand. And so if you think of your brand being a magnet, you are telling a story to people with the idea that you want them to become part of your story. And that is, it really gets down into, touching people deep, deep, deep in their hearts so that they can make buying decisions. And so I tell folks all the time, brand or be branded. You have a brand whether you like it or not. And I'm going to give you some tips on how you can actually go about the process of constructing that brand for yourself. So Andy, are there any questions here? I want to stop and see if anybody has any questions about any of the stuff I've said so far.
There was one question about fonts. Do you want to take it right now?
Why don't we take that at the end?
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right. Were they questions about my fonts?
No. They like your font. Your fonts are awesome. You just keep fonting along. Keep fonting.
Okay, I'm going to keep fonting. So let me font right here. We were at the marketing department talking about branding. Now we're going to take a walk across campus, and we're going to go revisit Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so when you think about branding, and you think about brand being a story, everything that we eat, that we drink, that we wear, that we buy, the services that we hire, the products that we buy for our businesses, all of that is part of us telling a story about ourselves, not just to other people, but to ourselves. And how this relates to Maslow's hierarchy is that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basically this theory says that we are all on this journey to get to this ideal sort of nirvana place in our lives, which is called self-actualization. And usually if I'm doing a keynote, I might ask people in the audience to raise their hands, say, how many of you are fully self-actualized? Surprisingly, when I present in the United States, very few people say that they're self-actualized. When I present in other countries, people are all over this. So I don't know what it is about our culture that we don't admit that we're self-actualized. But even if we're not fully self-actualized individuals, we have moments of self-actualization. And these moments are when we are at our best, most spontaneous, highest performing, most accepting of ourselves, most spontaneous, most moral, just like we are our best selves when we're fully self-actualized. And so part of that self-actualization are the cars that we buy, and the socks that we wear, and the designer goods that we purchase, but also, the things that we buy for our business. And generally, when we think about Maslow's hierarchy, the reason why it's a pyramid, it's because we have to satisfy the needs at the lower levels before we go to the next level. And so the basic physiological needs like food, water, shelter, air, basic biological functions, and safety needs, that's basically going to bed at night and feeling like you're not going to get eaten by a bear. The things that we buy, many of those things are designed to satisfy those needs, but everything that we buy that is above satisfying our physiological and safety needs really is about helping us belong to a group, or building our self-esteem, or getting us to this place of self-actualization. And so, you don't see a lot of people who are trying to satisfy the basic physiological needs of food, water, shelter, air, and not getting eaten by a bear when I go to bed at night driving a Tesla, right? We have people who are more highly self-actualized. And the reason that I present Maslow's hierarchy is because it's a really good way to think about a hierarchy for brands. And so this is the point at which, if you're taking notes, you should take some notes on this. So this is what I call the brand values pyramid. And the brand values pyramid is like Maslow's hierarchy for brands. So if you remember on Maslow's hierarchy, the stuff at the bottom of the pyramid being the basic physiological and safety needs, the same is true of brands. We call those functional benefits. That's the food, water, shelter, air, the baseline requirements for anything to be considered a whatever in a category. So for instance, if we're talking about a car, it has to have a steering wheel, it has to have tires, it has to have some kind of mode of perambulation. It probably has to have a motor of some kind. It doesn't necessarily have to have an engine, but it has to have a way to get you from point A to point B. Today, if you were to buy a car, it probably also has to have power door locks, power windows, power steering, and a lot of the basics that weren't available in the past. And so generally I ask people, when's the last time you purchased a car where power door locks and power windows were an extra feature? They were an option package that we paid for. So, this will date me, but going back like 30 something years, the very first car that I purchased for myself, I was offered a vanity mirror and power door locks and power windows as something that I paid extra for. And one of the smart car manufacturers said, hey, why don't we make that stuff standard equipment? And when they made it standard equipment, it became standard equipment for the entire industry. So it's really important that as an organization that's wanting to work on your brand strategy, that you don't market yourself on the basis of, we have wheels, we have power door locks, we have power windows, we have power steering, because the functional benefits are the ante to get into the game and anyone can imitate them. Marketing on the basis of what you do and what you are is just like if you were marketing ice cream by saying, we have milk and we have sweet and we have cold. So then the stuff in the middle of the pyramid, which is a little bit like Maslow's love and belonging and esteem needs, are the emotional benefits. So the stuff that we buy, it makes us feel a particular way. I have an iPhone. When I get my iPhone out and I use it, like I feel proud. I feel engaged. I feel connected. I feel a little cool, even though I'm not really the ideal customer for Apple's iPhone. I feel like it gives me a little bit of an edge. It makes me feel somewhat creative and kind of hip and connected. Those are emotional benefits. Emotional benefits are also imitatable. So if you're marketing things on the basis of emotional benefits, you're marketing your product on the basis of things like, we have backup cameras and we have a full-size sunroof on the roof of the car and things like that, things that other people can imitate. So finally, at the top of the pyramid, which is sort of like Maslow's self-actualization, the self-actualization for brands, we call these self-expressive benefits. And so these are the things that make a Mazda and not a Hyundai and not a Tesla and not a Cadillac. The self-expressive benefits are sort of the squishy things that make a brand what it is. These are the things that make you, you. So I encourage folks to use this brand values pyramid. Actually do an exercise with your team where you figure out for the category that we're in. Let's say, for instance, you're providing, let's say CRM software to small businesses. Let's say you're a SaaS-based CRM platform for small businesses. Go through this exercise with your team and say, what are the functional benefits of this category? What are the baseline requirements in order to be considered small business CRM software that's of a hosted variety, right? And the second part of that being, okay, so if these are all the things that are required in order to just be considered one of these, how well do we perform on those things? So that's the first part of the exercise. Then go to the second part of the exercise, which is, what are the emotional benefits? What do we do? Like, what are some of the bells and whistles that we have? What do we do? What do we provide that's a little bit different that makes people feel a particular way? I usually take one of those big pieces of paper, draw a line down the middle of it and say, do and feel. We write down, here's all the things that we do that are special. Here's all the things that we feel. And then finally, when you get to the top of the pyramid, what you're going to do is think about the self-expressive benefits. And I'm going to give you a cue for that. But any questions before I go on? Because I have like 2 more things and I'll be done.
We do have one question. Can you give an example of a brand that's truly mastered the top level of the pyramid and how that, like, explain a little bit on that?
Yeah. So, when you've mastered the top level of the pyramid, that is a brand that can stand alone, even when its functional and emotional benefits are similar to other brands in the field. I think about airlines, like this is a really good study in contrasts, right? So if you think about United Airlines and Southwest Airlines, they basically provide exactly the same functional benefits, right? Just in order to be considered a domestic air carrier, there are certain things that you have to do. They start to differentiate when you get to the emotional benefits, yet they're not that different. The self-expressive benefits, how we answer the question of what are the self-expressive benefits, is when we get into what are the values and beliefs of the organization. So when you think about Southwest Airlines, what does it say about a person that they are a Southwest Airlines fan, that they will do anything to fly Southwest? It says about that person that they value an airline that loves them and respects them as an individual. But the emotional and functional benefits are not that different. United Airlines basically says, like, you're just a number, and we might drag you kicking and screaming down the aisle of a plane when you refuse to get out of your seat on a crowded Friday night flight. We might put your family pet in an overhead bin and kill it. And so that's an example of, Southwest Airlines to me is a great brand that's gotten itself to the top of its pyramid. It's very, very clear on who it's for and what its values are. And it uses its brand as a magnet to broadcast to other people who share those values and beliefs. Likewise, United Airlines, I said earlier, I think I said brand or be branded. You have a brand whether you like it or not, right? United Airlines is a brand that, unfortunately, their brand promise is, believe it or don't, to be the most caring airline in the world. Yet there's nothing about their level of service, at least today, as we see it very visibly in marketing and in social media. There's nothing about how they're delivering their service that says we are the most caring airline in the world. So I hope that clears that up for whoever asked that question.
That's awesome. Thanks, Deb.
All right, great. This is a little soapbox moment here on the brand values pyramid. We talked about that stuff in the middle of the pyramid. If you only get as far as identifying like certain bells and whistles that are temporarily non-imitatable, once you put them into your product, into your brand, into your service, into your company, they become standard equipment for the entire industry. This is, if you take nothing else away from this today, remember that today's options packages are tomorrow's standard equipment. You wouldn't even consider buying a brand new car in 2019 if it didn't have Bluetooth, right? That was something 4 years ago when I was buying a car. It was dicey whether or not cars had built-in Bluetooth. And so it's really important to remember this. When you think about how you want to differentiate your brand, strive to get to the top of this brand values pyramid. I'm going to give you 2 more things to help you do that. Try to get to the top of the pyramid because someone else is going to imitate those options packages. And so how do you do that? The first thing is by pointing your brand at an ideal customer archetype. This is a really controversial area of branding and one area that I get a lot of pushback on from people who are not using the scaling up methodology to build their businesses, because in scaling up, we talk about customer avatars a lot. This is kind of a customer avatar, but this is a little bit more in-depth than that. You build the brand for one person. You aim the brand at a singular customer who is most highly predictive of your success. This is the one customer that if you just got like 20 of these, they would buy from you again and again and again. They are the most profitable to serve. They're the ones you are the proudest to represent. They're the ones that don't make your entire staff sit at their desk crying and losing hair. These are the folks that you would do business with again and again and again. This is the singular ideal customer archetype. And the reason that it's an archetype is that it often doesn't exist in nature. If you've seen one of these and you have one of these, by all means, document who that person is and look for customers that represent somewhere between 75 to 100% of those characteristics. And so how do you build this profile? Well, I have folks actually start by drawing it. So, we take one of those big sheets of butcher paper and you lay it out on the floor and you trace somebody's body, like in grade school. And then you draw. So that ideal customer, even if you are selling business to business, that ideal customer is a human being, right? And so who is that person? What is her job title? How old is she? What does she look like? Does she have short hair? Does she have long hair? What's her day like? What keeps her awake at night? What are her goals, challenges? What makes her feel sexy? If she's really resourceful, give her a giant handbag that has everything in it. If she is ultimately in control of the biggest budget, then have her standing on a pile of money. But do something so that you can visualize it and really, really dial it in. The most important thing about this ideal customer archetype, when you build that brand values pyramid and you think about what those values and beliefs are that get you to the top of the pyramid, you need to know who your brand is for. So that's the ideal customer exercise. And then finally, people ask me all the time, how is branding like sex? Yes, I am that rare person who had the guts to write a book that has both the words sex and laid in the title. And for several years was walking around being called the brand dominatrix, which that's another story for another day, how I'm evolving my own personal brand. But how branding is like sex is that the ultimate job of branding is to make the people who are buying your product or service get to be the protagonist in their own story. So when you think about that ideal customer and what their values and beliefs are, they're buying things, they're sort of acquiring things through their life, making decisions that help augment them to make them into the protagonist in their own story. And when you are the protagonist and you feel like you have the world on a string and you're at the top of the world and you have everything available to you, you feel like you want to take a roll in the hay. And so how branding is like sex, I think Scott Galloway explained it really well in his book. And he talks about, his book is called The Four. And he talks about how certain brands occupy the mind and the heart. And as you move down the body, the brands that occupy the genitals. And he was speaking specifically of Apple. As you move down the body, the margins get bigger and bigger. The sex metaphor comes from my own business. I've been doing this for a really long time. And I cut my teeth with technology companies. Technology companies are notorious about not really buying into this idea of making emotional connections with buyers. And I sat in front of a very, very smart engineering and software driven founder of Sun Microsystems, trying to get him on board with this idea of emotional branding. And he was just glazed over and he said, I just don't get it. And I said, okay, so at the end of the day, the shortcut for all branding is really thinking about how do you get this customer laid? I know that's crass, but it was a shortcut that worked, and it's a metaphor that works. So like if you forget what you're doing and you forget what your brand is about, it's a really good way to just get back in the zone. So finally, how do you figure that out? You ask these 3 questions. I call these the brand swagger questions. And so if you're taking notes, this is another thing to take notes on. The 3 questions that we ask, if you do nothing else coming out of this webinar and this stuff that I'm saying, try to answer these 3 questions for your company. The first question is, what does it say about a customer that they use your brand? So kind of like if most of you on this webinar don't know me, but if you saw me pull up next to you in a Ford F-150 truck at a stop sign and you looked over and you saw me, you would immediately know something about me as a person. Think about that for your brand. What does someone know about the driver of that car or the user of that software or the buyer of these building supplies? What does it say about a customer that they use your brand? That's the self-expressive question. The second question, which is the hardest question to answer and the one that most businesses spend the most time on, and I agree that you should spend the most time on this because this ultimately is the one that's going to make sure that you're a sustainable organization for years and years to come, is what is the singular benefit that customers get from you that they can't get from anyone else? This is the jobs to be done question. This is the what is the milkshake job? If you go and you look for the jobs to be done video on YouTube, there's a video about milkshakes. And Dr. Christensen talks about what is the job of a McDonald's milkshake. What is the one thing that customers get from you they can't get from anyone else? As we saw from the airline example, the one thing that people don't get from Southwest that they don't get from United is It isn't a feature. It isn't the functionality of the airline. It isn't the ability to get from place to place in some coordinated and safe fashion. What they get is love and respect. And so the hint on this question is that that one thing, that singular benefit that customers get from you, they can't get from anyone else, it's never a feature. It's never, ever a feature. It's almost always an essence or something that you do in a way that's different from anyone else. And then the final question is, how do you make your customer the hero in his or her own story? So this is kind of that, the ultimate brand or be branded. You have a brand whether you like it or not. Your customer is the brand, and your customer's story is the brand. And if you think about your customer being the protagonist in like a first-person video game, as they go through their day, they're picking up things that fortify them and give them strength and allow them to like fight the battle so that in the end they get 2 billion points and they win. How do you make your customer the hero in his or her own story? So if you do nothing else, just answer those 3 questions. I challenge you to do this ideal customer archetype exercise. Try to do that brand values pyramid thing. And there you go. You have a lot of the strategic foundation of the brand. And so that is all I have there. Phew. Wow.
That was like record pace. You set a new...
I know. I do it a lot.
Hey, I got one quick question. I'm going to open up to the rest of the field to ask what they want to ask.
Right.
I get the question a lot, and it's a difficult one, I think, to answer. But I'd like to hear your answer to, like, in 10 words or less, what is brand? In
10 words or less, brand is it is the shortcut for your story, inclusive of your customers. It's kind of your manifesto. It's the here's who we are for and ultimately what we promise for them. That's the best way to sum it up.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with some of the questions we had submitted.
Okay.
The question we had earlier on was, how does font impact branding and brand promise?
That's so font, and I will generalize this to all creative executions because I think it's important. I think that's a really good question. The font that you use is part of how your brand shows up, and it's part of how your brand articulates itself, as is the pictures you use on your website, the words that you use, the imagery that you use, the voice that you speak with. It is the very embodiment. Your creative is sort of the walking, talking advertisement for your brand. It is a shortcut for the story. And so, for instance, let's say you have a brand that is designed to be a very powerful and masculine brand that's designed to make people heroic. Like, just the whole idea is like, this is a hero brand and that's the role we play. We help you tame chaos and overcome challenges in your business. You probably wouldn't use like a very feminine looking italic font, like some of the fonts that I had in that presentation that I just blew through real quickly, right? And so the same goes for, the voices that you use in your television and radio commercials, or the colors that you use on your website. Again, going back to this example of if you're this like tough kind of hero archetypal brand, you probably are not using pastel colors in your implementation. You're probably not using those italic fonts. You're using, you're using things that really sort of direct the emotion and the feelings, and you want it to be consistent with what the messaging and the strategy is for the brand. So I hope that answers that question. It plays a very important role. Like in my world, creative is like the last thing we do, but we always want to make sure that the creative articulation, your websites, your ads, what you paint on the sides of your trucks, the uniforms that people wear, even how people answer the phone, you want all of those things to really match with the brand. And so, for instance, my company, Soul Marketing, we're the magician archetype, meaning we transform things, we make things happen, we make people think, wow, how did that happen? That means that the way that we show up, not just in our marketing, but in the way that that we serve our clients is that we want everyone to have a magical experience. We don't want them to have the experience of, like, say, going to Disney World and waiting in line for 90 minutes for Space Mountain and then having them turn on the lights. And then what do you see is like this mangled mess of roller coaster inside and, like, you know, dead cigarette butts on the floor and a bunch of grease and old vomit, right? So it's really important that your creative articulation, including your fonts, matches that brand strategy.
Leah was just recapping that she had that experience. I was like, really?
I did. I got stuck on Space Mountain and they turned the lights on, and I got to tell you, it ruined it for me. It really did. I mean, I still ride it, but
yeah, it's funny because in my new book that's coming out, like I do talk about, like, innocence lost, my experience with turning on the lights inside of Space Mountain. The other thing that ruined my experience at Disney, you know, at Disney, like, they totally embody this idea of the brand archetype of magician. And this is another area I've written extensively about this, and there's a chapter on this in my book. But if people want to go and read up on this area of brand archetypes, figuring out, like, ultimately what is my brand's role, like the human role that a brand plays in a person's life, you know, Disney is the magician archetype. And so another thing that, like, sort of ruined that whole magician thing, you go to Disney World, they call the people who work there their cast members, right? They're not employees, they're cast members. And they don't wear uniforms, they wear costumes. And I remember when I was there as a kid, the same trip where I saw the mangled mess that's inside Space Mountains, Leah, that you saw. I also saw a cast member on her way off the ride to, like, go on a break. And as she was, like, going around the fence that said, "Ooh, caution, cast members only," she lit up a cigarette. And it just seemed like it really, like, blew my mind, because this was supposed to be this magical experience to me. So it's important that your brand shows up in a way that matches with what you are trying to attract to it. That's the key message about it.
okay, awesome. So another one of the questions we got a bunch coming for you, is how do you expand your audience when you're building your brand around one specific soul built out individual?
So how you expand your audience, like, this is, so, when I talk about the ideal customer archetype, you build the brand for this one archetypal customer. You market to segments, right? And there are probably varying degrees of this ideal customer. And you know, here's a really good example of a brand that does this very well. So Nike, for instance, their ideal customer archetype ultimately is this young, high performance athlete. He's male. He's about 25 years old. He is their, you know, their customer is this person, and he embodies, like, all of the values of the organization. The great thing about the Nike brand is that it also sells to middle-aged moms like me, recreational golfers, high school athletic directors. They also sell to professional, individual, elite athletes and their coaches, the athletic directors of the University of Texas, professional sports teams, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on and on. The Nike brand, however, means the same thing, which the whole Nike brand stands for, like, tapping into that inner athlete inside of all of us and creating that inner dialogue with us. They do a good job of making that brand consistent across all of those different audiences. Now, I'm sure that there's, you know, I'm sure there's companies that are participating in this call right now that have the potential to become a Nike, but not all of us are Nike. And so it's a good question of, like, if you are building the brand for this one archetypal customer, how do I sell? You have to do this in a way that makes sense for your business. So, you know, when I first was starting out 16 years ago, I was kind of taking anybody with a pulse and money, right? Because I was trying to get this business off the ground. And what I found was, what emerged from that was a customer who was ideal for me, meaning the customer who could use my help, customers that weren't asking for, we call it at my company, we call it an I just need a. I don't do any work for anybody where they come and the first words out of their mouth are, I just need a brochure. I just need a website. We don't do that, because the work we do is strategy informed. So we have an idea of who these customers are. 90% of the customers that we deal with, like, fit that profile about 75%. Right? We have some that just fall outside of that, which we're working towards. Do we have an offering for them where they maybe can serve themselves and it doesn't, you know, overspend my resources, or we overservice people? Or are these customers that we want to start to refer in another direction? Building a business is very opportunistic. Building a brand is a little bit more focused. And so, the best way to think about this ideal customer archetype is to figure out, how am I going to find customers who maybe only fit that profile 50 to 60%, that aspire to be like my best customers, and what can I do to get them there? That's a really great way to think about expanding the brand. But really what branding gives you, and the idea of the ideal customer archetype, it gives you this relentless focus and the ability to say no to certain clients, and the ability to say no to certain activities, and the ability to be just extremely focused on your promise and ultimately the benefit that you want to offer your customers. You think that answers the question okay?
A great answer. We appreciate it very much.
All right.
I have a couple more questions for you.
All right. So the next one says, how do you approach question number 2, last few slides, when you're providing service in a very saturated market?
Yes. So if you're providing service in a very saturated market, I provide service in a very saturated market. I run a brand strategy and marketing consultancy. You cannot swing a cat around your head within 5 miles of my office and not hit another 145 people who say they do exactly what I do. Everyone is a brand strategist today. And really the magic of being able to answer that second question of like, what is the one thing that people get from you that they can't get anywhere else, is to figure out what is that milkshake job. And I encourage everybody to like read that jobs to be done stuff, or at least just go watch that 5-minute video from Clayton Christensen to understand like, what is the specific milkshake job that they hire you for, and then put a velvet rope around it. So for instance, people come to me all the time and they say like, how are you different than everyone else? There's 140 other people who are like right there on Spicewood Springs Road who offer the same stuff that you do. I can say, what you get from us that you can't get anywhere else is kind of a big kick in the ass. Like, if we don't do any I just need a, everything we do is through this strategy first lens. And if you don't have the stomach for that, we can't work with you. And I totally I call it the velvet rope. I put a velvet rope around it and say things, just to screen in the right types of clients for us, saying things like, the best brands in the world are the ones who are relentless about this idea of creating conditions of irrational loyalty. That means that they have the stomach and the resources and the time to go through the hard work of building fierce alignment on their brand versus just working with a marketing agency that's going to take orders for them. If you're just looking for speed and you're just looking to be in market quickly, I can recommend someone else to you. So, answering that question of what is the one thing in a saturated market, I hope that experience share helps a little bit with that. But it really does require you to understand like, what's the main reason people hire you? And so the last thing I'll say about that is, if you do not know the answer to any of these questions, go ask your customers. Go ask them. Say, what does it say about you that you hire me? And what is the one thing you get from us that you can't get from anyone else? And the third question, how do we make you a hero? If you can't answer those questions yourself, go ask your customers, because you'll see that there's mass around certain things.
So Deb, you said it a couple of times. I'll reiterate the question of why you do business with me. Going to your customers, picking up the phone, having that conversation is very, very powerful. We've done that a few times inside of Petra. I did it at my old company as well. And the consistency of response allows you to ferret down through what's the emotional connection of why they do business with you, and then look for more people that care about that. So it's not a hugely complicated process, but your customer has, customer, client, member in our case, they have the answer.
They do, always. They always have the answer. And you just, the big thing is like in that discovery process, not stopping at the surface answer. One of the reasons my company's been really successful at what we do in brand strategy is because we do hard things. It's actually one of our core values. We do hard things. That means we ask really hard questions. I've never been through a brand strategy exercise where there wasn't like some kind of bloodletting, right? Somebody's left the company because they're not on the same page as the leadership, or someone has been asked to leave the company because they're not on the same page as leadership, or they've uncovered like really important things that the organization is doing that are not moving the organization forward. And therefore like they're spinning off particular products or product lines or divisions and things like that. So, asking the question, it goes beyond asking. Like a lot of companies that I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, we talk to our customers all the time. We do a CSAT survey every year. Well, CSAT gets you CSAT, right? It doesn't get you the in-depth answers to those questions. Like Andy said, ferreting down those answers. I instruct my team when I train them to do discovery, I instruct them to ask the question, why, about 7 times, so that we can really get to the core and really get to the nut of like, what is the one thing, like ultimately when you strip everything away, when you know that you can buy this same service from 25 other places right down the street, what is the one thing you get from us that you can't get anywhere else? Actually having them answer exactly that question. So it's not just asking the question, but it's asking the question multiple times until you get there. And then using that, turning it back on customers and using that as something to broadcast out there to attract other people to you. So how we do that is like, the best brands in the world are the ones that create conditions of irrational loyalty. Don't you want that for your brand, right? Are you willing to do the hard work that it takes to become one of those best brands in the world? So that's how you can use all of this to your advantage. And frankly, if you answer those brand questions, what does it say about a person that they use your brand? What is the one thing that they get from you that they can't get anywhere else? And how do you make them a hero in their own story? You have all of your brand messaging written. That's all your brand messaging right there. And so companies struggle a lot with, what do I say? And this is a challenge to everyone on the webinar. If you go to your website and the first word on the website is we or your company name, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, it needs to be about them. So one of the things we'll do is get those 3 questions prominent in the recap that we send out, along with a link back to this video. I got one more question, and then Leah may have something. So the question is around the examples from Ritz, Amazon, and Google's brand promises are similar or are directly their mission statements or missions. So just from your opinion and your kind of marketing mindset, what is the crossover between what somebody might think of as a mission or a mission statement inside of a business and brand promise?
So that's a really great question. And those two things are really closely intertwined. And so mission, vision, values, brand, they all have to be in lockstep with one another. The main thing that's a difference between mission and brand is that 100% of the time, the mission is inclusive of customers and inclusive of the customer experience in thinking about it and in constructing it. Sometimes organizations' missions may not be directly related to customers. So for instance, Bausch & Lomb is a brand that I worked with many, many years ago. And I think their mission was to, their mission was to become like the world's biggest eye care brand, which isn't necessarily inclusive of customers. The main benefit for customers ultimately is like more customers can see better, can see more clearly or whatever, which is more like a brand promise. A lot of companies that I work with, the mission statement is very, very intertwined with the brand promise. I will say this, we are often in danger of overanalyzing and over-constructing things and putting things into, constructs and concepts and things like that. If you have a mission statement that is inclusive of your customers, and frankly, you should, look to see, does that make sense as a brand promise? Like, does that make sense for us? And it's okay if they are one and the same. I don't like to, I don't like to spend too much time on the semantics about things, but the most important takeaway is that the brand has to be inclusive of the ultimate benefit that you provide for customers. Now, a lot of people get the brand promise and the brand positioning mixed up, and like I could do like a whole 5-hour webinar on the difference between those two things, but that's kind of the long answer to that question about how our mission and brand promise related to one another.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So we're right up against time. I wanted to make sure and thank you for being here today and spending your time with us and sharing your knowledge. We will have this recorded and up on the website. We'll send out an email to the participants within 48 hours or something like that. And then it'll be It'll be hosted up on the website, and people can go back and view it at their leisure and when they like. Be sure and go see Deb at South by Southwest, which is when it's pretty soon, right?
It is. It's the beginning of March. It's going to start on March the 6th. And if you include the music part of it, I think it goes on through like the 15th or 16th or something like that. So it's a great experience. If you do find yourself in Austin, hit me up. I don't know if you're giving out my contact information. I love to hear from people. Hit me up. I would love to learn about your brand and answer brand questions or just like exchange fun brand stories, whatever you like. I'm kind of a brand geek. It's all I ever talk about. So, let me know if you're here in town. I'll be here the whole time.
Yes. Would you be open to some follow-up email from some of the folks on the webinar?
Absolutely. And also, I've got a couple of giveaways if people are interested. If you go to debgabor.com, there's links to both the Branding is Sex book, which is the one that we talked about here, and the new one that's coming out through debgabor.com. You can get access to free chapter downloads from either book. And there's some cool videos on there, me talking about different concepts in branding and things like that. So that's a really good way to get in touch with me. Or you can email me, deb@debgabor.com.
Well, that's simple. Nice job.
Yeah, thanks.
That's good branding.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Deb, thanks so much for being a part of this webinar and teaching our people how to be better as we go down this path of building businesses. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you all. Take care and happy branding.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.